these pictures mean? Why is God doing this? And the answer is a rather frightening one. He says in verse 5, "This is Jerusalem. I have set her in the midst of the nations and the countries all around her." Yes, the whole ancient world had its pivot point in the land of Canaan. All the trade from Babylon and Assyria had to come around the northern edge of the desert and down the coast of Canaan to go to Egypt. The trade from Europe, from Greece, came through Canaan on its way to the Red Sea and southward. Canaan was the pivot point. God didn't accidentally put Abraham there. He put Abraham right in the middle of the greatest highway of the ancient world. Why? Oh, Isaiah tells us, to be a light to the nations. All the nations were to see the truth of God, the glory of God, the faithfulness of God. It was right there in front of them in the way God was dealing with His people. And what has Judah done? Verse 6. She has what? Rebelled. Rebelled. A rebellious house, Ezekiel. A rebellious city, as we saw in his call. And so what is God going to do? God says, all right, I put you in the middle of the nations so they could see how faithful and loving and holy and true I am, and you rebelled. So there you are in the middle of the nations, and in the middle of the nations, I'm going to show the nations how holy I am through you. One way or another, children, he says, you are going to be a witness to the nations. Either you'll be a witness of my faithfulness to deliver you and protect you and keep you, or you will be a witness of my holy justice. But God, we're not as bad as all those pagans around us. I mean, we're bad, but what does God say? Look at it in verse 7. In verse 6. She has rebelled against my judgments by doing wickedness more than the nations, and against my statutes more than the countries that are all around her. Because they have refused my, this particular version says judgments, others will say ordinances. Really, it's my government. You have sinned worse than the pagans because you knew better. You had once lived under my government. You knew my ways. You knew how the world was meant to live, how it was meant to operate. You knew it, and you wouldn't do it. And I declare to you, you are a worse sinner than those pagans who don't know the clarity of my light like you. Judgment begins at the house of God, says Peter. Am I living in the light that has been given to me? Are you? That's what we're going to be judged upon. Judgment is coming, he says. Now he speaks here again and again of abominations. Look at verse 9, for instance. I will do among you what I have never done the like of which I will never do again, because of all your abominations. The New Living Translation says, because of all your disgusting sins. This word abomination is a word that is repeated again and again in the book of Ezekiel. It is that which is contrary to nature, contrary to the world as God has made it. Mothers who destroy their children. Men who burn with lust for men. Making God in the image of creation. Disgusting. Abominable. A son rebelling against his father. Abomination. Disgusting. Detestable. One of the fascinating things about the book of Ezekiel is that it is the most literary of the prophetic books. Virtually all the rest of the prophets are clearly collections of speeches. Now maybe the prophet wrote the speech down afterward, or maybe somebody was taking shorthand and worked with the prophet to collect them, but they're all collections of speeches except Ezekiel. Ezekiel pretty clearly is written down, bigger blocks of material, probably because it was to be sent back home to Jerusalem. But whether that's the reason or not, it is the most literary of the prophets, and therefore, in many ways, is very polished. But in the middle of the polish, you have some really, really gross words. I'll talk to you about one of them tomorrow and try to do it somewhat delicately. Gross words, gross phrases. They don't come through very clearly in the English, but it's always, I guess, perversely fun for me as a teacher to watch students reading Ezekiel in Hebrew for the first time and watching their eyebrows go, whoop. Did he say that? Yeah. Shock value. Right in the middle of this polished, smooth presentation, wham, right between the eyes. Abomination. Don't you understand, he's saying? God is disgusted at this. He's not just angry. He's not just put out. He's not just sad. He's disgusted for all your abominations that you have committed. And so 1/3 of you will die of pestilence and famine during the siege. 1/3 of you will die through warfare before, during, and after the siege. And 1/3 of you will be scattered to the winds. Now notice what he says. He says in verse 13, "Thus shall my anger be spent, and I will cause my fury to rest upon them, and I'll be avenged, and they will know that I, the Lord, have spoken it in my zeal," my passion. Here's the importance of prophetic prediction. Is God in charge of the world or not? Well, we look around us and we say, yeah, I think so, but I can't explain this, and I can't explain that, and I don't understand this, but I think God's in charge. And God says, to show you that I am in charge, I'm going to tell you what's going to happen out there. Something that nobody could know except the one who made it all. And when it happens, then you will know that I am the Lord. That's the purpose of predictive prophecy. It is not so that you and I can make a timetable and figure out when he's going to do what he's going to do next. That's not the point. The point is, God tells us in advance so that when it does happen, we can say, yes, yes, you are in charge. It's a support to our faith. It's an encouragement to our faith. And he says, when it happens, you back in Jerusalem are saying it'll never happen. It can't happen. Couldn't possibly happen. Doesn't fit our theology. I'm telling you, it's going to happen. And when it happens, you will know that I am indeed the Lord. Here for the first time we have this phrase. It's going to show up about 4 more times before the end of chapter 7. Then you will know I am the Lord. For those of you who are here on Friday morning, we talked a little bit about the idea that Ezekiel sees the coming deliverance from Babylon after the destruction as a new Exodus. The Exodus was supposed to help people to know that He is the Lord. Somehow, in the intervening years, that judges cycle, as I called it, they'd forgotten it. They thought they were the Lord. Ezekiel says, I was going to bless you as I blessed you in Egypt, and you would know that I am the Lord, but you wouldn't do it. You thought you produced the blessing. You thought you did the work, and you forgot who I am. So, all right, I wanted to show you that I am the Lord through my blessings. You wouldn't do that, so now I'll have to show you that I am the Lord through destruction. Then you will know. I told you it was going to happen, and when it happens, you'll know that I am the Lord. In chapter 6 and chapter 7, then, we have 2 separate messages which are reinforcing this idea: destruction is sure. 4 and 5 were these 4 illustrations and the explanation of what they mean and why that's going to happen. Chapter 6 is a separate message. Chapter 7 is a separate message. Chapter 6 is a message of judgment against the mountains of Israel. Now, what in the world does God have against the mountains? What's wrong with these hills? Oh, you see it immediately. Verse 2. Son of man, set your face toward the mountains of Israel and prophesy against them, and say, O mountains of Israel, hear the word of the Lord God. Thus says the Lord God to the mountains, to the hills, to the ravines, to the valleys. Indeed, I, even I, will bring a sword against you, and I will destroy your high places. Around the ancient world, it was believed the gods lived on the hilltops, on the mountaintops. You would find on virtually every high hill a shrine, an altar to the God who lived on that hill. So God doesn't have anything against the mountains of Israel. What He has against is the things that are on the mountains of Israel, these idol altars. Now, if you've read your Old Testament much, you know that again and again and again, God speaks out against idolatry. And for so many of us Americans, that seems to be pointless. We're not idol worshipers. We don't have little statues somewhere in the corner of our house. We don't have a statue of the Virgin Mary out in the backyard. We're Protestants. We don't believe in idolatry. So this is beside the point. It doesn't have anything to say to us. Don't be so sure. What is idolatry? Idolatry is an attempt by humans to control the natural world to meet their basic needs. Now, what are the basic needs of us humans? Well, number one, of course, is sustenance. Got to have minimum of food and drink. But when you got those, there are things that work on us even more strongly. pleasure, comfort, security, power. Yeah, these are the things we gotta have. Well, how do you get them? How do you get security? This is such an insecure world. How do you get power? There's so many people scrabbling for power. How do you get comfort? How do you get pleasure? How do you get your basic needs? We're so little, we're so fragile. This is such a big world. Somehow or other, we've got to figure out how to control nature to make it supply our needs. That's idolatry. Now, the ancients understood what we Americans are only beginning to understand. The ancients understood that behind the material, physical forces of the universe are spirits. And if you're really going to get control of your world, it's not enough to control the material, physical parts of it. You've got to get behind it and get that spirit world. Now, for 150 years, we Americans have been what is technically called positivists. That is, we have said, if you can't feel it, if you can't weigh it, if you can't measure it, it's not real. The ancients knew a lot better. And we're discovering it as fast as we can go. What I'm saying is that we Americans have been idolaters at heart for a long, long time. I can control my world. I can make it give me these things I need. And why, dear friends, are so many Americans so hard-hearted today? Why are so many good church people so hard-hearted? Because it works. We're the most comfortable, secure, pleasure-filled, powerful, satisfied people on the globe. Who needs God? Except for the great aching void in our souls. Except for the brokenness in every one of our relationships. Except for the gnawing sense, I missed something. I know what it is. I need another BMW. That'll do it. I don't have anything against BMWs. God says, I have a word against the mountains of Israel, covered with their idol altars. Oh, America, America. Augustine said it, idolatry is the worship of what should be used and the use of what should be worshipped. The worship of what should be used. How much of my time is given to what I use? That's what's really worth something in my life. And how often do I try to use God as though He were an idol to meet my needs? In that 6th chapter, we read, did you see it? Did it catch your attention? An amazing statement. And again, the scholars, it's so amazing that the scholars have said, well, we need to correct that somehow or other. But I don't think we do need to correct it. God is given to amazing statements. Look at it in verse 9. He says, I'll leave a remnant who will come to their senses and be so ashamed of what they've done. Could we have treated God like that? Could we have used God like that? Could we have made Him so little and useful and insignificant and worthless in our lives? Remember, Worship is from the Old English worthship. I worthship thee. And God says, come off it. I'm not worth an hour of your time once a week. I'll leave a remnant, and they'll be ashamed. How could we have done that? And then verse 9, those of you who escape will remember me among the nations where they're carried captive, because I was crushed by their adulterous heart, which has departed from me, and by their eyes which play the harlot after their idols. God crushed? God shattered? Oh, thinkers for thousands of years have struggled with this. If there is a being who is really not this world, then that being must be absolutely without feeling. I mean, if he's really other than the world, then he can't care about what goes on here, because if he does, then he's going to get involved, and he can't be. Aristotle called him the unmoved mover. If there is a God, he is so far away, he doesn't know, he doesn't care. Or if there is a God who does know and who does care, who is touched by my sorrow, who is crushed by my adultery from him, oh, then he's a little friendly God who lives under my bed. And if I get upset with him, I can put him out on the porch in the rain. This word says there is a God who is beyond anything we can imagine. I like what C.S. Lewis says. He says, when we see love, we will know how hopelessly inadequate our word love is. But it's the best we've got. Can the God who snapped his fingers and the Big Dipper jumped off the end, can that God be crushed by my adultery and still be God? The Bible says so. And if he is angry at your sin and mine, it is not because of his offended pride. It is because of his broken heart. If you've been a parent, you've been there. Your child has done something. Because you're fallen, some of the anger is, how could you do this to me? But not all of it. Some of it is because of what he has done to himself. Because of what he has done to your relationship. Because of what she has done to your hopes. God says, yes, I'm furious. I'm raging. Why? Because you've crushed my heart with your adultery and your harlotry. It's fascinating to me. I tell students all my original thoughts are either from C.S. Lewis or Dennis Kinlaw. This one is from Kinlaw. Have you noticed that idolatry and adultery always go together in the Bible? Yes? I must supply my needs. I must manipulate my world. I must get what is coming to me. It's mine. I deserve it. I deserve to be happy. It's mine. I'll do it. I'll make it. And humans being what they are, there is no perfectly happy human relationship. Have you found that out yet? If you're married, you have. God has given Karen and me a good marriage. A marriage filled with joy and comfort and a lot of happiness. But there's tension. There's things that have to be worked out, and sometimes the working out is a little painful. And there are some marriages that are much more painful than ours by a long shot. Well, I have a right. I have a right to have my needs supplied. You're not supplying my needs anymore, Karen. Bye-bye. I have a right. Idolatry and adultery go together. Oh, Karen, you are not God in my life. You don't supply my needs, and I will not demand of you something you cannot do. God is the supplier of my needs. He has given me you. Thank God for His best gift. He has been faithful to me when I deserved the back of His hand. And as He gives me grace, I will be faithful to you. Idolatry and adultery go together. Find an adulterer, and he was an idolater before that. Broken my heart. And so I'm going to send you into captivity. Why? To destroy you. Ha! Wipe you off the face of the earth. I'll never have to look at your ugly faces. No. I'm going to send you into captivity because there in captivity you'll come to your senses. And you'll say, oh God, what I've done to you. Have mercy on me. Forgive me. Take me back into that broken heart of yours. You'll be ashamed. And then, verse 13, you will know that I am the Lord. Again, in verse 14, then they will know I am the Lord. Judgment is never God's intended last word. God's intended last word is healing and restoration and hope. Why am I doing this? So that they might know me. And remember, friends, know in the Bible is never just head knowledge. It is intimate, personal relationship. When the Hebrew uses know to talk about the sexual relationship between a man and a woman, that's not accidental. I want you, God says, to know me. I want to know you. And then in chapter 7 comes sort of the poetic finale, a great poem announcing the end has come. The Hebrew word for end is kates. It's sort of got a karate chop in it. Kates. This is the very same word that was given to Amos 150 years earlier for the northern kingdom. About 750 BC, about 30 years before the fall of Samaria and the final end. Hey, everything is going glorious. At that point, the Assyrians were kind of quiet, and Israel, the northern kingdom, was stronger and richer and more powerful than it had ever been before, except for Solomon. And here comes this sycamore fig picker from Judah. I suppose we would call him a cotton picker. And he says, I want to paint a picture for you. God showed me a picture. Do you see this basket? What's in it? Oh, end fruit. Kites. The last fruit of the summer, the end fruit, the final fruit. Yeah, it's a basket of kites. And Amos says, you know what it means? It means, Kates, it's all over. The end is upon you. It's like we walk in with a basket full of flowers, and we say, what are these? And they say, well, those are cuttings. That's right. And you know what it means? You are cut off. The very same word. And those who knew the Bible would have shuddered, I think, when they saw it. Oh my goodness, that's what Amos said. And the people laughed at him. They said, we're rich, we're powerful, we're comfortable, we're famous. The world comes to our doorstep. You old fool. You don't know what you're talking about. And 30 years from that day, the entire kingdom was gone. God knows what he's talking about. And so in these chapters, he says the end is in sight.